Greetings, everyone. GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we basically got up to speed. We saw the end of the undead campaign where Kel'Thuzad, Arthas held off all of the Alliance forces as they rushed in. And Kel'Thuzad summoned Archimonde, who then destroyed Dalaran. And yeah, so I think what we're going to do now is, again, with this chapter and the next one we read, the next episode we do, we could probably wait until later, but I just feel like it's a nice segue into now starting the Frozen Throne. So stay a while and listen to chapter 21 of Arthas, Rise of the Lich King. Yeah. Kel'Thuzad, Arthas mused as he waited atop the verdant hill for the one he had been assured would come, was a useful lich to have around. He was utterly loyal to the Lich King, even to the point of convincingly playing the lapdog to Archimonde and Tychondrius while in their presence, if that was what was required to secretly serve. Arthas had opted for silence. He did not trust himself to lie as convincingly as Kel'Thuzad. The two demons had deemed them non-essential. They would soon see how wrong they were. Carelessly, they had left the Book of Medivh in the Lich's bony hands. In that mine, too, were spells and magic so powerful that Arthas knew he would never be able to fully grasp their scope. The third part of the plan, Kel'Thuzad had said once the demons were gone, as idly as if he were conversing about the weather, was the true heart of the Legion's plot. Arthas remembered what Kel'Thuzad had told him earlier. First had been the creation of the Scourge, then the summoning of Archimonde. He listened now with intense interest as Kel'Thuzad continued. The Legion is after nothing less than the taking of all magic and the devouring of all life upon this world. And to that end, they plan to consume the concentrated, powerful energies contained within the Elves' Well of Eternity. In order to accomplish this, they must destroy the single thing that contains within it the truest, purest essence of life energy on Azeroth. The Well of Eternity lies across the ocean on the continent of Kalimdor, and the thing that would thwart the Legion is called Nordrassil, the World Tree. It grants the Kaldorei immortality, and they are bound to it. Kaldorei, Arthas was confused. I know of Quel'Dorei. Are they another race of elves? The original race, Kel'Thuzad corrected. He waved a hand dismissively. But those details are of no consequence. What matters is that we must stop the Legion from achieving this goal. And there is one among the Kaldorei who would aid us. And so it was that, using his magics, Kel'Thuzad had teleported Arthas to this distant continent and this hill that afforded an expansive view. The forests here were lush, healthy, but Arthas could already see what the Legion had wrought in the distance. Where the land, trees, beasts were not dead, they had been corrupted. Devour all life, indeed. A figure crested another hill below him, and Arthas smiled to himself. This was the one whose arrival he had been awaiting. They were certainly different, these night elves. This one's skin was pale lavender, etched with swirling tattoos and scars cut into the skin in ritualistic patterns. A black cloth was tied around his eyes, but he appeared to have no difficulty in navigating the terrain. He carried a weapon that resembled nothing Arthas had ever seen. Instead of a traditional sword which would be grasped by a hilt with a blade extending from it, this weapon had two jagged blades that glowed the sick green hue of something tainted with demonic energies. So, this one had trafficked with demons before. Arthas waited a while, observing. The night elf, Illidan Stormrage, Kel'Thuzad had said his name was, raged to himself. Apparently the list of wrongs piled against him was a lengthy one, and he ached for vengeance and power as much as Kel'Thuzad had said he would. Arthas smiled. I am free after 10,000 years, yet still my own brother thinks I am a villain, Illidan ranted. I'll show him my true power. I'll show him the demons have no hold over me. Are you certain of that, demon hunter? Arthas said, his voice carrying. The night elf whirled, brandishing his weapon. Are you certain your will is your own? The elf might have been blind in the traditional sense, but Arthas felt seen regardless. Illidan sniffed and growled. You reek of death, human. You'll regret approaching me. Arthas grinned. He was itching for a good one-on-one fight. Come then, he invited. You'll find that we're evenly matched. Invincible reared and galloped down the hill as eager for action as his master was. Illidan growled and ran to meet him. It was almost like a dance, Arthas mused as the two warriors faced each other. Illidan was strong and graceful, his skills demonically enhanced, but Arthas too was no mere soldier, nor was Frostmourne an ordinary blade. The fight was fierce and swift. Arthas had been right. They were indeed evenly matched. After too short a time, both combatants fell back, breathing heavily. We could go on fighting like this forever, Illidan said. What is it you truly want? Yeah, so now we are jumping forward quite a bit. We're now at the end of the game, basically. This is the mission, I think, where you control Illidan. And you get the Skull of Gul'dan, so this is wrapping up the last little bit, so this is good that we're reading this here, because technically we did cover this material already. Arthas lowered Frostmourne. From your muttering earlier, I hear that you and your allies are beset by the undead. The Dreadlord who commands this undead army is called Tichondrius. He controls a powerful warlock artifact called the Skull of Gul'dan. It is responsible for corrupting these forests. Illidan cocked his head. And you wish for me to steal it? Why? Arthas's white brows lifted. This one was indeed quick. He deserved a semi-truthful answer, Arthas decided. Let's just say that I have no love for Tichondrius, and the lord I serve would benefit from the Legion's downfall. Why should I believe anything you say, little human? Arthas shrugged. A fair question. Let me answer. My master sees all, Demon Hunter. He knows that you've sought power your whole life. Now it lies within your grasp. His gauntleted hand clenched into a fist in front of Illidan's blindfolded face, and as he expected, the Night Elf's head turned toward the gesture. Seize it, and your enemies will be undone. Illidan lifted his head slowly and turned his face to Arthas. He was unsettling, this blind man who could so obviously see. The elf stepped back, nodding thoughtfully. Without another word, Arthas turned Invincible's head around and galloped off. Kel'Thuzad would summon him back shortly. All had gone according to the Lich King's plan. He only hoped that Illidan had been as fully obedient as he had seemed. If not, there could be complications. She was nothing of the living, nor did she have the power to resist the commands of the one who had brought her screaming into this new existence. But Sylvanas Windrunner had will. Somehow Arthas had not broken that. He had done so with others. Why was she seemingly the only one who had not caved utterly to him? Was it her own strength, or was it because he enjoyed tormenting her? The banshee that she was now would likely never know, but if her will was her own because Arthas found it amusing, she would have the last laugh. So she had vowed to herself, and Sylvanas always kept her promises. That's not true. She's broke a ton of them. In the past and in the future. Time had passed in the world of the living since Arthas Menethil and the Scourge had swept through her beloved homeland, and much had occurred. Her so-called master had objected to being used as a pawn, together with that arrogant floating sack of bones Kel'Thuzad, the one responsible for corrupting the glorious Sunwell. Arthas had conspired against both the Dreadlord Tichondrius and the Demon Lord Archimonde, whom Kel'Thuzad himself had helped usher into Azeroth. Sylvanas had paid keen attention. Anything Arthas had to reveal about the way he thought and the way he battled was useful to her. He had not attempted to slay Tichondrius himself as he had Mal'Ganis. Oh no, the wily once-human prince had tricked another into doing his dirty work for him. Illidan, the luckless being, had been named. Arthas had been able to smell Illidan's hunger for power and use that against him, goading him into stealing the Skull of Gul'dan, a legendary Orcish warlock. To do so, Illidan would have to kill Tichondrius. Arthas would be rid of the Demon Lord, and Illidan would be rewarded with an artifact to sate his lust for power. Presumably all had gone according to plan. Arthas and therefore Sylvanas had heard nothing of Illidan since. As for Archimonde, so mighty that he had been able to destroy Dalaran, the great mage city, with a single spell, He had fallen to the power of the life he had come here to consume. Sylvanas now hated the living with the same passion the Legion had had, and thus it was with mixed feelings that she learned of his fall. The Night Elves had sacrificed their immortality to defeat him. The pure focused power of nature had destroyed the demon from within, and then the World Tree had surrendered its vast power in a cataclysm that sent out a massive shockwave. When Archimonde had fallen, his skeleton, all that was left, so too had the Legion's attempt to gain a foothold in this world been defeated. Sylvanas returned her attention from her reverie to the present, as the name of the late unlamented demon lord caught her ear.
"It's been months since we last heard from Lord Archimonde,"
their leader Deathrock said. He stamped his hoof impatiently.
"I grow tired of watching over these rotting undead. What are we still doing here?"
They were in what had once been the gardens of the palace, where Arthas had strode so long and so short a time ago to murder his own father and unleash doom on his own people. The gardens, too, were rotting as well as their populace.
"We were charged with overseeing this land, Deathrock," chided the one named Balnazar. "It is our duty to remain here and ensure that the Scourge is ready for action."
"True," rumbled the third, Varamathras, "although we should have received some kind of orders by now." Sylvanas could hardly believe what she had just heard. She turned to Kel'Thuzad. She despised him as much as she despised the Death Knight he appeared to serve so willingly, but she hid her dislike well. "The Legion was defeated months ago," she said quietly. "How could they not know?"
"Impossible to say," the Lich replied. "The longer they remain in command, the more they run the Scourge into the ground. If something is not..."
He was interrupted by a sound Sylvanas had never expected to hear in this place, the distinctive sound of a gate being battered and broken. Both undead turned at the noise, and the demons growled angrily, instantly alert, black-webbed wings flexing. Sylvanas's glowing spectral eyes widened slightly as none other than Arthas himself emerged through the gate. His familiar undead steed all but pranced beneath him. He wore no helm, letting his white hair fall freely about his pale face, and he wore that self-satisfied smirk that Sylvanas so despised. Her insubstantial hands attempted to clench into fists, but such was his control over her that all her fingers could manage was a brief twitch. Arthas's voice was resonant and cheerful.
"Greetings, dreadlords,"
he said. They stared at him, visibly bridling at his insolence.
"I should thank you for looking after my kingdom during my absence. However, I won't be requiring your services any longer."
For a second they simply gaped at him. Finally Balnazar recovered enough to retort,
"This land is ours. The Scourge belongs to the Legion."
"Ah," thought Sylvanas, "here it comes." Arthas's smirk widened. His voice was positively gleeful.
"Not anymore, demon. Your masters have been defeated. The Legion is undone. Your deaths will complete the circle."
Still grinning, he lifted Frostmourne. The runes along its blade danced and glowed. He tightened the reins, and the skeletal horse bore down on the cluster of 3 demons.
"This isn't over, human!"
Deathrock cried defiantly. The dreadlords were faster than Arthas' skeletal horse. Frostmourne sang only of frustration as it sliced through empty air. The demons had created a portal and vanished to safety. Arthas scowled, but his good humor returned quickly. Sylvanas realized it was because he had them on the run, and their deaths would likely be only a matter of time. He looked up and caught Sylvanas' eye, beckoning her to him. She was forced to obey. Kel'Thuzad needed no coercion, floating happily to his master's side like an obedient cur.
"We knew you would return to us, Prince Arthas,"
the Lich enthused. Arthas barely spared his loyal servant a glance. His gaze was fixed on Sylvanas.
"My heart is moved," he said sarcastically. "Did you too know I would return, little Banshee?"
"I did," Sylvanas said coldly. It was true. He had to, or else she would never have her chance for revenge. He twitched a finger, demanding more from her, and she gasped as pain shuddered through her. "Prince Arthas," she added.
"Ah, but you will now address me as king. This is, after all, my land. I was born to rule, and I shall. Once the..."
He broke off, inhaling sharply. His eyes widened, and then his face contorted in pain. He hunched over the bony neck of his horse, his gauntleted hands clenching hard on the reins. A sharp cry of agony was wrenched from him. Sylvanas watched, experiencing the most pleasure she had known since that dreadful day when Quel'Thalas had fallen. She drank in his pain like nectar. She had no idea why he was suffering so, but she savored every second of it. Grunting, he lifted his head. His eyes stared at something she couldn't see, and he extended an imploring hand toward it.
The pain is unbearable,
Arthas growled through gritted teeth.
What is happening to me?
He appeared to listen, as if an unheard voice was replying.
King Arthas, Kel'Thuzad cried, do you need assistance?
Arthas didn't reply at once. He gasped for breath, then slowly sat up, visibly composing himself.
No, the pain has passed, but my powers are diminished.
His voice was full of puzzlement. Had Sylvanas still possessed a beating heart, it would have leaped at the words.
Something is terribly wrong here.
The pain took him again. His body spasmed, his head falling back as his mouth opened in a soundless cry of pain, the veins on his neck standing out like cords. Kel'Thuzad fluttered around his adored master like a fussy nursemaid. Sylvanas simply watched coldly until the spasm had passed. Slowly, carefully, he slid off invincible. His booted feet hit the flagstones, slipped out from under him, and he fell hard. The Lich reached out a skeletal hand to help the prince. No, self-styled king, to his feet.
My old quarters,
gasped Arthas.
I need rest, and then I have a long journey to prepare for.
Sylvanas watched him go, staggering weakly in the direction of the rooms he had grown up in. She let her lips curve into a smile. The spectral fingers on her hands twitched for a moment, then curled up into angry fists. It was oddly peaceful in Silverpine. Soft mists swirled gently near the moist pine needle-covered earth. Sylvanas knew that if she had possessed physical feet, she would have felt it soft and springy beneath them, would have inhaled a rich evergreen scent from the moist air. But she felt nothing, smelled nothing. She floated insubstantial toward the meeting site, and such was her eagerness for the meeting that at this moment she did not regret her lack of senses. Arthas had enjoyed turning beautiful, proud, strong-willed Quel'Drai women into banshees after his success with her. He had given them to she who had been their ranger general in life to control and command, tossing her a bone like she was a faithful hound. He would shortly see how faithful a pet she was. After overhearing the Dreadlord's conversation earlier, she had sent one of her banshees after them to speak with them and gather information. The demons had accepted her emissary with pleasure, and had asked for her mistress to join them tonight to discuss something of mutual benefit regarding the Banshee Queen's current status. In the depths of the forest she could see a faint green glow, and floated toward it. Sure enough, they awaited her as they had said they would. 3 great demons turning to her, their wings flapping and betraying their agitation. Balnazar spoke first.
Lady Sylvanas, we are pleased that you came.
How could I not? She responded. For some reason I no longer hear the Lich King's voice in my head. My will is my own once again.
It was indeed, and it was purely by that will that she kept the elation from her voice. She did not wish them to know more than she chose.
You Dreadlords seem to know why.
They exchanged glances, their faces curving into smiles.
We've discovered that the Lich King is losing his power,
Varimathras said, hellish glee in his voice.
As it wanes, so too does his ability to command undead such as you.
That was good news indeed, if it were actually true, but it was not specific enough for Sylvanas.
And what of King Arthas?
She pressed, unable to keep a sneer out of her voice as she used the Death Knight's title.
What about his powers?
Balnazar waved a black-clawed hand dismissively.
He will cease to annoy us, like a summer fly whose time has come and gone. Though his runeblade Frostmourne carries powerful enchantments, Arthas's own powers will fade in time. It is inevitable.
Sylvanas was not so certain. She too had once underestimated Arthas, and along with the cold hatred in her heart, she also bore guilt for her part in his blood-soaked victory.
You seek to overthrow him and want my help to do it, she said bluntly.
Deathrok, the one who appeared to be in charge, had stood quietly by while his brothers spoke to Sylvanas. They had been angry and impassioned, but his expression had remained neutral. Now at last he spoke in cold tones of utter loathing.
The Legion may be defeated, but we are the Nathrazim. We'll not let some upstart human get the best of us.
He paused, looking at each of them in turn.
Arthas must fall.
The glowing green gaze settled upon Sylvanas.
And you have been watching us, little ghost. So have we been observing as well. It is obvious that the Lich Kel'Thuzad is far too loyal to betray his master. There appears to be affection between the two.
His gray lips curved in a dangerous smile.
But you, on the other hand,
Hate him.
She did not think she could hide that truth even if she wanted to, so fiercely did it burn inside her.
We are united in that much, Dreadlord. I have my own reasons for seeking vengeance. Arthas murdered my people and turned me into this monstrosity.
She paused for a moment, the loathing of both Arthas and what he had done to her so intense it took away her ability to speak. They waited patiently, smugly. They thought they could use her. They would be wrong.
I may take part in your bloody coup, but I will do so in my own way.
She wanted them as allies, but they needed to know that she would be no toy.
I will not exchange one master for another. If you wish my aid, then you must accept that.
Deathrock smiled.
we will slay the Death Knight together, then.
Sylvanas nodded, and a slow smile crept across her ghostly face.
Your days have numbers, King Arthas Menethil. I am the hourglass.
Okay, so that gets us up to basically the third, starting out the third campaign, the first half of it. So there are these other campaigns first, and there are situations that happen, which we'll talk about in Chronicles and in the game, about why the Lich King loses his power. So that gets us pretty far. I don't think we're going to need to continue the Arthas book for some time. Maybe at least until halfway through the game, because it's going to be then when we start to uncover why this happened, which will be uncovered in the game. But there's no real books. This is definitely a weak spot in terms of what the game has covered. Almost everything has been covered so far. But there are weak areas for sure. There's no real novels that cover the Hordes campaign in Kalimdor. And really, there's probably not a need of that. But the human and undead campaigns from the first game are covered in depth. And I guess they're the more interesting, because the Orcish campaigns and the Night Elf campaigns aren't covered that much, although we've touched on them some at least. And when we come to the other, there's just really not a lot of book content that covers the Sentinel campaign and the Blood Elf campaign. Really, there's just not that much. So we'll get to do a lot of those because the book writing is really more interested in what's happening with this Arthas Sylvanas characters as opposed to the things that Thrall and Jaina and them are doing. But we have still some more things to go before we can actually get to playing the game. We're getting close. It's nowhere near the front loading that we have with some of the other games, but probably a good 5 or so episodes left. But for now, this episode is in the pipe 5x5. And I appreciate you, as always, for watching and listening, and I'll see you next time on Lore.